right. I think we're live.
You're live. Kudos.
To the world. Okay. So Chad, you've been learning about model view controller, huh?
Yeah, I learned a lot about model view controller. Even more with Brother Barney in the interview.
Did he teach you a lot about it?
He taught me a little bit. Because I asked him mainly, because I created a little sample in the code of the view. As, a dumb button.
Yeah, just something to have.
This is my view. And I said, here's some kind of code that could be a controller, because if you click the button, there could be code that controls that message and interacts with the model. And I said, I told him I didn't make a good controller because I wasn't sure how to make the model just for a simple button. And I asked him, so what constitutes a model? And like, could I have an array? And then he got into explaining and said it could be a simple database, or he said it could be just your model could be considered an array too.
An array.
Yeah, so let's say, I'm trying to think, just anything that interacts with an array. Maybe multi-dimensional array. An array just stores values.
Oh, so the model is literally just data?
Yeah,
is that all it is?
Yeah, the model is data.
So the controller, are you saying the controller would perform functions on that data?
Mm-hmm. So here's I love this page right here. I read, the model represents the data and does nothing else. It doesn't depend on the controller or the view. And then the view displays that data in somehow. And so the view has, displays the data or has options for user interactions like buttons, and interacts with the controller. So the controller can provide data to the view or interpret actions as it says, such as button clicks. The controller depends on the view and the model. So depending on the button click, it might send data to the model and then bring data back because of the button click. You know what I mean?
Do you think you could just draw a quick sketch on the board?
Mm-hmm.
So the controller is what takes the data and kind of manipulates it to how you want to send it to the view.
Mm-hmm.
So like, for example, say you have date time MySQL object and you want to display that, but you just want the time. The controller is what would manipulate the way it looks. And then you send it to the view.
Any of that, yeah.
Is controller.
Is a controller. The controller is the one migrating that data, controlling it. View is really just everything you see.
So not everything though has to go from view to model to controller. From view to controller to the model, right? Can it go just view to controller back to view if it's something simple?
Not necessarily, because the controller needs some sort of data, so it has to talk with
What
the
about
model.
user input?
Then so the user's inputting stuff into the view, so the view interacts with the controller, grabs that data that you input, and is putting it into the model because it'll store it. Does that make sense? Because it is data.
So here's another question. I'm just trying to get a full understanding of this. So you have a button that brings up a screen.
So you click a button and brings up
some kind of overlay screen. So you push that button, send something to the controller, and then literally all the controller would have to do is display the view. Wouldn't have to interact with the model at all, right?
That's what's interesting is I've read online some people can have their own interpretation. Like some people said sometimes the view and the controller can be the same thing, the same object. Like, oh.
How does that work?
Yeah. Rule number 1 is the golden rule of MCV. The model represents the data and does nothing else. The model does not depend on the controller or the view. That's the number 1 rule to follow. So in answering your question, depends on your interpretation of a view. The information of that view I guess it's maybe stored somehow. How would it be? How is this? It's not stored. It's just some other page of code, right?
Not necessarily. The view could be programmatically created within the view controller.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
Or it could be there and the controller just makes it visible. Like for me, I'm trying to comprehend why it would need to interact with the model. So like, this is what I see. View controller model. I see that the view and the controller can interact by themselves. That's just how I see it. Sometimes you don't need to go all the way. Other times it's view to controller to model and then all the way back again.
Yeah. Okay, so you're seeing maybe it's this view and controller.
Sometimes.
Let me see here.
Okay, so the model has to do with the data.
Yeah, that's it says that's
pure
to remember. That's the golden rule. I found that online everywhere. The model does not depend on the controller of the view. The model represents the data and nothing else. Does nothing else. It's just data.
And so you're saying that the view sometimes doesn't have to access the data, so it just goes to the controller and back.
Exactly. Like when bringing up a pop-up window. Like say, say you have a simple about the game button. Just pulls up information about the game, which I guess that information could be stored.
That technically what you're saying might just be all the view, because right here it says the view is an interface to view and modify the data. The controller operations that can be performed on the data. So whenever I see the controller always says it's operating on the data.
So what you're saying is view to controller is really just view to view.
Yeah. That's just view.
View interacting on itself.
Yeah, that's just because everything.
So all the controller does is talk to the model and gets that data and sends it to the view. That's all
So
it does.
it's just like a middleman.
It's a middleman.
So,
and it can go either way. Like if you're wanting to put some information to a database, then the controller is going to take that from your view.
Right.
Or get it back. But yeah, from here, it says operations that can be performed on the data. And everywhere I read in this example, it's always talking about the controller talking with the model. And it even says right here, don't put the controller code in the view.
So with that being said, the view interacting with itself already is in the controller. Like the code for that already is.
And that's why sometimes some people
controller.
say
The view and the controller
and the view, in some cases, the controller and the view are the same object sometimes.
Which seems to be the case with iOS.
Yeah. With what you're thinking. Yep.
Well, the view controller, I mean, you have a .h and a .m in Xcode, and the view controller.m has the view did load method there, and so that would make sense.
So the controller controls the view, but doesn't control the model. The model is just its own little thing that can have data added to it.
The model does not depend on the controller of the view, but the controller provides model data to the view.
Okay.
And sends data from the view to the model as well.
It can do that as well.
Okay.
That makes sense.
Then another question is, so for the model, could the model be something like an XML file?
Interesting.
So like for the idea that I was thinking, like the spiritual journal app, what you'd do is you'd have someone type in an entry, and then it would be stored in an XML format with like entry, scripture, topic, whatever, tag. And then that way, when you run up the app again, the model would be the XML file, and then the controller would then get that data and then display it to the view.
That sounds.
I just typed in your question,
Okay.
seeing if somebody answered it.
It's actually very helpful. I'm learning a lot right now.
Isn't that weird?
Nobody's really answering that question. Your question. Okay. There we go. That's a good question. How should a model be structured in MVC? A model is a layer. The model is not a class or any single object. It's a very common mistake to make. Proper MVC, the M contains all the domain business logic, and the model layer is mostly made from 3 types of structures: domain objects, data mappers. So, that's my answer question. It's only responsible for the storage. If you store information database, this would be where the SQL is, or maybe use an XML file to store data, and your data mappers are parsing from into XML files.
That makes sense.
Services, you can think of them as higher level domain objects. Instead, services are responsible for interaction between domain objects and mappers. Well, it's getting into depth of what a model. Now we're getting into the layers of the model.
Okay.
Domain objects. This is where you have to find validate data before sending an invoice. Interesting. And this guy gave quite the answer here on Stack Overflow.
Yeah, there are some weird people out there.
Stack Overflow scares me sometimes.
Should we go more into that, or I can quickly talk about what I talked with Brother Barney about with messaging.
That'd be.
Do you want to go into
Probably.
that real quick?
Yeah,
I think we've learned a lot about MVC. So yeah, let's move on.
Okay.
What time's your class at, Chad?
So 11:30, but I like to get there a bit earlier because I don't want it to be sitting on the floor or in a chair in the middle of the room.
So with messaging, when you instantiate, or when you have an object and you want to call a method, there's you do the object
Funky bracket syntax.
So this is still kind of fuzzy to me, but I'll just say what I know. And another way you want to look at it is receiver and sender. So I was reading this article and said one of the benefits of Objective-C is that at runtime you can basically change. You can have a different method, and then you'll basically send this method to the receiver, and the receiver will say, okay, I don't know this, or I do know this, and then go from there. And I was talking to him, like, what are the benefits of it? And basically he was saying was that if you had like an NS string object and you wanted this string to do something, to do a thing that's not normal, like to do so, like have a subclass or to make a subclass for it. But you only wanted to do it for this string. You can do that, and the way that brings up the other question too. How does that work? But it was just basically saying you can, instead of having to have strings, like normally if you want a certain string to do something different than other strings, you can do it that way with Objective-C. You can do it at runtime instead of having to create a whole nother class, compile it like that, and then go. That's kind of what I learned so far. Did you guys hear what he was talking to me about with messaging?
No,
Yeah, I kind of missed it.
Okay. That's what I got so far. It's still a little confusing, partly because I've never dealt with this before. I've only really done C++ and Java. But yeah, you can, at runtime, you're basically saying, here's my message, and I'm going to send it to the object, and then the object will say whether it recognizes it or not. So this could compile, even if this were not a member of the class, this would compile, but then throw an exception during runtime if the object doesn't recognize it.
Is it a fatal exception? Will it kill the program?
No.
It won't?
I think that depends. Yeah, I think that depends, but from what I learned, no.
So the thread continues.
Yeah.
Okay.
But what I basically did was, my dad's a software engineer, and I sent him the article. And we're going to talk about it today.
Nice.
Oh, cool.
So
Well, that's convenient.
Yeah. He's never worked with Objective-C, but yeah. That's really all I have so far. So I gotta figure this out.
Messaging seems really
yeah,
confusing
I'm
to
gonna have
me.
to read up on it too. I'm gonna ask any questions.
It's a really, just seems weird to me. A little foreign.
You went and studied interface design, right?
Yeah,
That's a topic.
I know.
Okay.
And I realized that.
So
And so
it wasn't a total loss.
my question to Brother Barney was kind of
He might have
twofold.
thought,
It wasn't-
yeah,
it literally wasn't necessarily just for the project. I
Yeah.
really wanted to know how to move from screen to screen, which I figured that out. But then he said, that's not how apps are supposed to be
yeah. So
designed.
you could claim that, and so what I would do is whatever code you got that was for the project, just don't say it's for the project.
Yeah, just don't say it's for the project.
Yeah, I was studying mobile interface design. That's what I was making.
Yeah.
Unless he'll be like, Chad said you guys were working on
But chats.
We don't talk to Chad.
So
it.
a little bit of what I learned is
Ow.
that you okay?
So I was just flinging back and forth, and I just jammed my finger in
Ooh.
Nail.
Okay. So a little bit of what I learned was that the whole concept of single view design
Mm-hmm.
is a lot more complex than I thought it would be, especially since that's how good apps are supposed to be designed.
Mhm.
Like, I didn't find any easy class for displaying an overlay. I mean, they have their very specific ones like an alert or something like that, but it was, I literally researched for 3 hours last night and couldn't figure out how to do it. I figured out that it's really easy to do something like that over an image. Because like my idea was, what Brother Barney was saying is that the user, you don't want the user to get lost. You want the user to always know where they are.
Mhm.
And so having some context behind the current view tells them where they are. It shows, oh, this is where you were. This is where you are now.
Mm-hmm.
you can go back here once you're done here, kind of a thing. And so I imagined like a little transparency, or like on the iPhone, you've got this menu, it's frosted, you can see what's behind it, or the notifications view, like your stuff's behind there. But I couldn't figure out necessarily how to do that unless it were an image. Images have a class that you can blur them and put something on top. But I didn't find anything really to do that on a view. So I want to talk to him some more about how he suggests we approach that.
Well, I think of an app like maybe Instagram. It's, if you look at it, it has the menu here at the bottom. It's terrible.
I don't have Instagram.
Oh,
it's terrible.
it has 5 things at the bottom.
Kind of like the Facebook app. Facebook has the same
Oh,
thing.
so you're saying, so for changing views, like, that's a good.
I haven't looked at the Facebook app.
It's coming.
I just use paper.
There it is. See,
Oh, okay.
let's get the same kind of thing.
I guess it's like, would that be technically the same view, and it's just, switching.
Well, the whole point of him doing the single view, right, is so that the user doesn't get lost.
Right.
But if you have that at the bottom,
It's like
I
a
think
menu. You could actually change the view.
yeah.
You just switch it through.
Which, I mean, is in theory all I was thinking about when I
Yeah.
asked him that question. But then he said
It's like, that's horrible.
they all good mobile applications remain in a single view. And I even like went into detail with him about it. So like you have one main screen that's always shown behind and everything else is shown on top. And he was like, yeah,
I'd also like examples of these apps too.
I know. I asked him those and he didn't have any good examples.
I can't think of a single app that doesn't. I mean, look at all of Apple's apps. Heck, even weather, technically, the weather app, you have to swipe to the side to change a view.
Yeah.
As simple as that app is. For the mail, I mean, they have this new tips app. We have to.
Oh yeah, that tips app. You just slide back and forth between. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I really want to get more clarification from him on that, specifically on how to accomplish that, because he literally said, because those can be accomplished by having multiple views and then setting like the swipe to, but he literally talked about having one view and overlaying like all of your different screens on top of it, which for one sounds like a beast to manage. Like I wouldn't want to have to go through an app that has like, because the other thing is it's not easy to really see the view. Like you have to go through each and every one to find what you want. And even then, like I couldn't get all the content that was under one view to see. I couldn't see it. So I don't know. I'd really like to see some examples from him on mobile interface design, like on how he would design an app. Because right now I just can't imagine it.
And then I have another question for him about. I gotta go. But let's say you bring that topic up to him, you start asking him questions, and then both of us start asking him too. Would he consider that topic for all 3 of us that we discussed in class?
I think if we all go to the board,
All to the board?
make it extremely apparent, saying we want to learn this, and then
Okay. That's what it
sounds like.
keys back. It's like, well, no, only Travis asked me that. He initiated the conversation. Where's something recorded?